Now we have a presentation regarding the history of the Osborne community by Ted Brownstein and Steve Lockwood of the Historical Society of Lake Worth. Gentlemen, you've got 10 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Commission. It's really a privilege to be able to share our ongoing research. I wanted to emphasize that this is a work in progress, and the Society is still doing research in newspapers and public records, as well as, taking oral history from residents. So this is only where we are at this point in time. So before the city of Lake Worth is established, I think most of you have heard of the story of Jewel and Fannie and Samuel James. You can see this 1902 map has Jewel. There has Lake Worth up north, which was really what became Palm Beach. It was renamed, and then Lake Worth took the name over. No Boynton Beach, no Lantana, no Delray here yet at this time. And the people that lived here were people from the southern states, Georgia, the Midwest, as well as free blacks. Some European immigrants and Bahamians came over. So it's interesting that after Reconstruction, the North and Central Florida began suppressing the rights of blacks from 1877 when the federal troops left onward. But South Florida and the Keys retained the spirit of the Civil War and the Union. And it's interesting that this statement was published in the Tropical Sun in 1898, which was pretty late, after the Civil War, stating, "We believe in equal rights to all, special privileges to none." So this was the era when Fannie and Samuel James were here, when we had a mixed racial community and everybody was getting along. This is our legacy. So when the train came in, of course, the population began increasing dramatically, including the black population, came in to build the railroad, to work in the fields, to work in the hotels. And then they had the Afro-mobile. Don't you love that? It's with, basically bicycling tourists around Palm Beach. So then the town of Lake Worth was a development by the Palm Beach Farms Company. They came in between 1910 and 1912 and bought out the farmers, including Fannie James and the other farmers in the area, and platted out what was to become at that time the town of Lake Worth. They began selling lots in 1912, and then we'll see the town was incorporated a year later. So this is interesting how fast this town came out of the Everglades. By the end of 1912, there were 308 residents already in town with 125 houses, and I love this, 876 fowls. So chickens, geese, ducks, they counted them. Yeah. Oyster catchers probably were not considered. Oh, okay. So now we start to enter into kind of the bad news of our history. There was a legal segregation plan as the town was laid out in 1912 and incorporated in 1913. Most neighboring towns like West Palm and Boynton had segregated housing districts with certain areas of the city where whites could live and certain areas where, quote, coloreds could live. And the same strategy was common throughout the South and was mandated in the original Lake Worth Charter. That is to have residential districts that were for white residents only and residential districts that were for, quote, colored. And this passed constitutional muster under separate but equal, because both were supposed to be treated equally. But sometimes the facts get in the way. So anyway, one intervening slide. This was the original Lake Worth train station that was up kind of close to where the shuffleboard courts were, or where the hatch is now. And you can see when you enlarge the signs above the waiting rooms that there was a colored waiting room and a white waiting room in the train station. And of course, there was segregation on the trains as well, separate cars, separate seating by race in the South. And then when they got north of the Mason-Dixon line, they could mix. So this is actually from the clerk's office, the handwritten copy of the original Lake Worth 1913 charter. And it says in part, to establish and set apart in said town, meaning the town of Lake Worth, separate residential districts for white and Negro residents. I can't read the caption there. What is this?
Chamber of Commerce makes it official.
Oh, right. Okay. So the Chamber of Commerce was promoting the sale of lots in the city of Lake Worth, and they were talking about all the amenities that were in the town. And there were a lot: proximity to the beach, a town band, all kinds of parks, and so forth and so on. But one of the amenities at that time was that it was a white settlement. There were no colored people present in town. So that was the spirit of the 1910s and 1920s. Oh, here, no, I see it just popped in. Okay, nevertheless, Lake Worth de facto created no colored residential districts until 1926. So from 1912 until 1926, there were no black residents, and Lantana had the same policy of being all white settlements. During this period, Lake Worth was marketed nationally as all white. So the Chamber of Commerce here listed this as one of the key advantages of the new town. Quote, no colored people in the town, a strictly white settlement, from the Lake Worth Herald, 1913. But so there was an area between the city limits, which basically ended at 12th Avenue at that time, down to the Lantana city limits. There was a proposed Osborne colored edition that was platted in 1917. But at that time, the city refused to annex this into the city. So they remained an all-white settlement. And then there's an unincorporated area then between Lake Worth and Lantana that later became the Osborne colored edition. So this was the no man's land between these two all-white areas. That was the unincorporated area where people of color could live. So the original plat centered on Washington Avenue there and ran east to L Street and left to Wingfield. And you know the boundaries have changed. We'll get into that. So these streets don't run through, and there's a reason for that because of the history of how they came into the city. This was designed to be cut off from the rest of the city. So what happened in Lantana in 1921 when they incorporated and became an all-white city is that the black residents had to move out. One of the legacies of that is Grant Chapel AME Church, which stands for African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is in the Osborne area. There you see a picture of Reverend McIntosh, who spoke last night. This is her church. It was founded in Lantana, was forced out in 1922 by the Ku Klux Klan. And then they moved to the unincorporated area at that time in between Lantana and Lake Worth. So now that in 1926, the city did annex the Osborne colored edition into the city, but there was a lot of fear on the part of the whites only people that these black folks were going to be in the neighborhood. So they did pass additional statutes at that time. And here's a segregation law from 1926, which is simultaneous with the annexation of Osborne. White persons are hereby prohibited from establishing a place of residence within the territorial limits above described in the city, so set apart for the residents of Negroes. And here's the kicker, a $500 fine for each 10 days of living in the prohibited area.
So wait, this is colored edition.
Well, I don't think it happened, and there wasn't a statute, but this is the only statute we were able to find on that.
1926, $500 is
It was,
Huge amount of money.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is all documented history. So in this early segregation period, we could say from 1926 to about 1950, there were separate white and black neighborhoods in Lake Worth. There was no public school for the Osborne children. There were separate drinking fountains downtown, and we know where they are, where they were. There was a colored balcony at the Lake Theater. Blacks were upstairs in the balcony. There was a separate entrance for them after they bought their tickets to go upstairs. And here's the part that many people don't know. Blacks had to be in their neighborhood after dark or have employers' permission. And we have living people that'll tell you stories about being confronted by gangs on the street and so forth because they were coming home from work late or whatever. And this ran into about 1952 before this was changed. We haven't found supporting statute for this. So apparently the police took it upon themselves with the consent of the population to make sure that this was enforced. And the Ku Klux Klan was especially powerful. We have some very ugly history here in Lake Worth with the Klan. So here's a poster advertising a Klan rally. There were rallies as large as 1,000 people, apparently about where the Northwest ball fields are now, in the open field up there. There were, white sheet hooded rallies downtown. I find this a really interesting story. There's a gentleman by the name of Max Greenberg who was Jewish and was not in the Klan, but he went downtown with his son to observe this Klan rally, and they were all hooded and robed in traditional Klan garb. But he said it was a small town and he could recognize everybody by their shoes. So we have his oral testimony at the Historical Society of Palm Beach County talking about this. By the way, Max Greenberg established Pioneer Hardware in 1912 here in town. It became Pioneer Linen and still exists up on Clematis in the 4th generation. So that store has a heritage back to Lake Worth. Okay. The Klan ran a school, and they bragged about this in the Klan newspaper, the Fiery Cross. We've located the site where the school was at 6th Avenue South and J Street, and they held the property under the name of the All-American Club. So, see how that works. Yeah. And of course, fear was used to enforce segregation. So then there was an effort to remove the colored population from that Osborne area after annexation. And a motion or a group of women, a delegation came to the city commission in 1926 requesting that they be removed. But in their wisdom, the commission tabled the motion and it never moved forward. So with that, we're going to go into the period. Why did that disappear? Okay, we're going to go into the period where the Osborne community is growing, and I'm going to pass the baton on to my colleague, Steve Lockwood.
Let's keep you a couple more minutes if we can. I don't want to.
Okay, I'll move very fast. Some old timers may remember when this addition was made, which was for a cemetery, but the other half of it was for a dump. But the bottom line is the Osborne community before the 60s was a distinct neighborhood that was created by segregation, as well as the neighborliness among the residents themselves, is often known as the quarter. Housing conditions were abominable, as acknowledged in a public health survey published in the paper. About half the houses still used privies, and about half the houses didn't have water connection. And the Herald editorialized that they were, of course, shocked to discover such conditions existed in the community at that time. Nevertheless, the Osborne community had a vibrant civic life, really supported and run by themselves, and reminiscences of community elders today can talk about that in a very interesting way with their own school, their own community services, and churches, of course, that still exist today, as Ted noted, starting with the St. John's Episcopal Church, a basically Bahamian church in the 20s, of many other vital churches added thereafter. The Historical Society of Lake Worth commissioned a study by Dr. Alicia Wynn, who has interviewed community elders about the history of the Osborne Colored School, the first school publicly supported, established in 1947, lasting until 1971. It's on the National Historic Register. It's a 3-room elementary school built by community members, and of course is well used today by community services. There were with children, for the children. There were a lot of interesting community businesses not recorded in the papers, only in community memory. Make an interesting presentation on its own, but in the era of segregation, basic commercial services were supplied by the community in the community. As we all sadly know, Lake Worth was very slow to integrate. There were the famous Teresa Jakes attempt to immigrate the high school. There were a few sit-ins, at least those that were recorded in the paper. there was at least one significant community protester, a civil rights leader, came from West Palm Beach, named Robert Mitchell, led marches from up Dixie Highway from Osborne to the commission, and managed to provoke some significant response in improving community services. The end of housing segregation was a long story, but didn't result in the changes in the zoning code. And finally, not until 1995 was the word colored taken out of the platting of state and local, that's both state and local. Since that time, of course, community amenities have continued to grow by a combination of community activity and also public support, the gym, the park that we all know about, and perhaps symbolized most dramatically by the mural of unity. The so-called Wingfield wall had sort of two lives, one back in the 90s, when residents painted scenes of unity and harmony and so on. And then in 2021, provoked by the death of George Floyd, the community decided the wall should be updated. And it now records a lot of important community history and community leaders, and is a very important source. So the bottom line is that today, Osborne still retains a lot of its historic unity and identity. It's, of course, much more ethnically mixed than it was. Many of the Black residents have moved out to adjacent areas, but still come back for community reasons to churches and neighborhood organizations. And certainly Osborne continues to be a critical component in the Lake Worth community, both today and for its history. And of course, today, we're all proud of the fact that people of all races now live and work in our city, in all the neighborhoods so that all ethnicities can call Lake Worth Beach their home. So the Historical Society continues to research this area. We hope to be able to come back to you perhaps next year with an updated history of Osborne in greater detail. And Ted is handing out a copy of the research that we commissioned from Dr. Alicia Wynn of West Palm Beach, who based the history of the Osborne School on her oral interviews of several important community elders. So on behalf of Ted and myself, thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much. And I asked, I just want to say a couple of things. I asked Ted and Steve to do, Steve has just returned for the season and is a remarkable researcher as with Ted. We are indebted to the Historical Society for the kind of work that we do. We are a community that does have a history. And there's a lot of people, there's a lot of people.
For Joan, for Trudy,
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm glad to see you here, guys. This, we are very fortunate to have such a historical group. And I'm gonna actually, you mentioned next year, the Historical Society does such interesting work. I would like to have you guys come more frequently and give us not just about the Alps, but the history of Lake Worth, because then it's on the YouTube. People can look it up. It would be very helpful. I want to thank you for all that you do. Two more things. One, you mentioned that the Osborne colored, the word colored was taken out of the platting. I just have to give myself a plug. When I was city attorney, that was my goal, and I was able to work with the commission's approval to work with the county to get that plat changed, so it no longer says Osborne Colored Edition, it says Osborne Edition. And lastly, you have a program, I think, on the 24th, the Gulfstream?
Thursday night.
I'm going to give you a plug for that. Thursday night, what day?
That's
19th.
the 19th.
Okay.
This coming Thursday in the new cultural center called the Gallery, reclaimed for community meetings in the library. Meter off of Lucerne.
And what time will that be?
Line invites at 6 and the program begins about 7.
Okay, great. It's a history. They're going to be giving the history of the Gulfstream Hotel, which I know is near and dear to all of our hearts.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Simon. Commissioner Boyd?
Yeah, just one thought, something that caught my eye. In the presentation, there was a mention that many of the folks that had a connection to the Osborne community have moved out, but still have ties. One of the places that's very direct for us as a community is the cemetery. But that people may not live here, but feel very much a part of this community, and it should influence our policies of how we deal with resident, non-residents. So.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Really appreciate all the work that the Historical Society does. Thank you.